Hello and welcome to episode 145 of Fergo and the Freak. I'm that bloke from Rugby League Project, Andrew Ferguson. You can find me on Twitter at AndrewRLP. Joining me once again is the magnificent League Freak. You can find on Twitter at League Freak. How you going there, mate?
I'm going good so far. How are you?
I'm splendid.
Excellent. That's what I like to hear.
um, so we're going to break our brief coronavirus no zone because we've come up with a bit of an idea, and
And
that
I think,
is
you know what? This idea goes back to what we always talked about this podcast would be, hey?
that's right. Which is looking at something from the past and how it's linked to the game today.
Exactly. Given context to modern day events.
You only get that here.
Yeah, nowhere else.
So there's been a bit of talk about it. So we're just gonna dive right in. Bit of history, bit of real time stuff is all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to look at how rugby league responded to the Spanish flu, which hit Australia in 1919. So I suppose a bit of background. The Spanish flu began in 1918. Now, there was a bit of censorship going on after World War One in most of the Allied and Axis countries. So it's hard to actually pick out where the Spanish flu began. And it's got its name because the first country that got hit by it was Spain. And it was after the King of Spain fell ill to the virus. So it sort of just got its name from that because Spain was the first one to properly report on it. A lot of it was transferred around the world through returned servicemen going back home after the war ended and stuff like that. And that's pretty much how it got into Australia. So in January 22 of 1919, a serviceman was on a ship in Melbourne, going on a journey back to Sydney. He was with another passenger. Not too sure who the other passenger was, but he was very ill at the time. After the 2 days on the ship, they got off in Sydney. The passenger was very ill, had high temperature, had headaches and all that sort of stuff. And this soldier fell ill with exactly the same condition. He checked himself into a hospital. The three nurses who treated him all fell ill with exactly the same illness. In the 3 days after he landed in Sydney, he then got diagnosed with having the Spanish flu. So in the space of 5 days, this soldier who's returned home has gone from being healthy to fully infected, and he's travelled from Melbourne to Sydney via a boat.
And this becomes like the first, I guess the first modern day pandemic. And they knew what was going on over in Europe. They knew how hard it was hitting. And so when they realised they had it here, I mean, it must just have been terrifying.
Exactly, because I don't think, because there'd been very little talk about it in the media, there would have been no idea what, I suppose, if there was any different symptoms, how aggressive it was, how quickly it spread, how it spread, how to treat it, how to avoid it, that sort of thing. So a lot of it was just guesswork at the time. The New South Wales state government, though, were pretty quick in jumping into action. So the day after this soldier and the nurses were found to have been suffering from the Spanish flu, they decided to shut down all libraries, schools, churches, theatres, public halls, and places of indoor resort for public entertainment. 2 days after that, on January 30, they also said that everyone was required to wear masks covering their mouth and nose. The congregation of people in public spaces was disallowed. Restrictions were placed on crossing the border between Victoria and New South Wales. And initially, this was obviously a lot of these bans and stuff like that were put in place in Sydney only because that was a place that was hardest hit. But they ended up going to the whole state after a while.
Mm-hmm.
I've got some stats just on how, I suppose, how deadly this virus was. Globally, 500 million people got infected with it, and approximately 100 million of those people died from it.
Yeah, it was, like before everyone that's listening freaks out, it was way, way, way more deadly than the current coronavirus is. But it's just like you have to give those stats to show what this pandemic was like and how devastating it was at the time.
Yeah,
I've heard historians talk about it, and one of the features about this virus was that the sickest people, it was the first time in history that they were moved en masse to hospitals. And they feel as though that's one of the reasons why it spread so quickly. Because usually in the past, when there'd been a pandemic, the sickest people normally would stay at home and die because they couldn't be moved. They weren't moving around. But we got to a point in human history where we had ambulances, we had big hospitals, we had the ability to try and save people. And that was one of the reasons why this pandemic, it moved around the world so quickly.
that's exactly right, and it was so aggressive.
Yeah.
So at the time, around about 25% of the global population had been infected with the Spanish flu, which is just insane.
Mm.
It lasted in Australia for 9 months. It killed around 6,400 people in New South Wales alone. Infected nearly 300,000 people in Sydney, and of those, 3,902 died.
Far out. And weren't you, I think you said before we started the podcast, because we talked a little bit about this, the population of Sydney was about 800,000?
Yeah, about eight. I think it was about 890,000. So it was just better than one in every three got infected.
That's incredible.
Just it moved so quickly. It was insane.
Mm.
So the interesting thing here is a medical council was set up to try and, I suppose, come to grips with it and how to inform the public on what they should do to try and avoid it, how to cope with it when they do get it, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But one of their solutions that they said here to help try and prevent it was fresh air. And they said that was the best natural resistance to the flu. And they encouraged outdoor activity, provided it was away from crowds.
Now, that's interesting because I wonder if they did a thing in China with the current coronavirus where if you were diagnosed with it, they would put you into giant hospital camps, basically. And one of the things they did in these camps is they put on dancing lessons and they wanted everyone to get up and dance, and they said it would help you. But what it actually was that anybody that wasn't well enough to get up and dance, they obviously weren't getting up. And so they knew to treat those people. I wonder if there was an element of that in this idea of, get some fresh air, get up and get fresh air. And the people that weren't able to get up and get a bit of fresh air, they kind of knew they were the ones that really needed treatment right away. Otherwise, they were going to die. I wonder if there was an element of that even back then. I don't know if that's the case, but it just reminded me of how they've been treating this coronavirus in China recently.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point. I think back then the mentality would have been the fitter and healthier you are, the better chance you've got of avoiding this flu.
Mm.
The crazy thing about the Spanish flu, though, is it hit young adults harder than any other age, which usually with most of these viruses, it always hits the very, very young who aren't immunized,
mm-hmm.
and the very, very old who are very weak.
Yeah.
And this one hit the people in the middle who were expected to be the ones who would survive from it.
Yeah, and I mean that's why it was so devastating to soldiers during World War One, and they were finding like that was one of the things on the front lines of World War One. They would have people that would stay on the trenches who were a little bit unwell, or well, not a little bit unwell, quite a bit unwell, but they were able to still fight. And the ones that weren't able to fight, the really, really sick ones, they would take them back to hospitals and basically bring them back into the rest of the population. And that was really devastating for the spread of the disease as well.
Yeah.
It was a weird one, very weird one.
This is the scientists offered several possible explanations for the high death rate of the young adults of the Spanish flu, with saying it triggered a cytokine storm which ravaged the stronger immune system of young adults. However, in 2007, an analysis was done in medical journals, and they found that the viral infection was no more aggressive than previous influenza strains. However, malnourishment, overcrowded medical camps and hospitals, and poor hygiene promoted bacterial superinfection, and that's what it was that was killing these people more aggressively.
Yeah. I mean, you can imagine that's the perfect environment for it. Was the front line of the war in Europe in World War One, where they were fighting in trenches, and I mean there were terrible conditions there. So it was almost like the perfect storm for the Spanish flu.
Yes. Now the Spanish flu was the first of two pandemics caused by the H1N1 influenza virus. The second being swine flu in 2009.
Mm-hmm.
So I suppose if you want a modern version of it, that's it right there.
Yeah.
So now we'll get into essentially how Rugby League reacted to the Spanish flu.
Yeah, because all of the reading that I've done about Rugby League history, and I can honestly say I've never heard about how Rugby League reacted to Spanish flu. It's almost like a blind spot in the game's history.
Well, we will see. On April 14, the league held their meeting where it was revealed that Harold Horder and Les Cubitt, two great players at the time, in quotes, are still wearing their brains out as to how they're going to dodge the flu restrictions regarding the upcoming season, how they're going to play the games and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. It was also reported that another test player, Charles Chook Fraser, was very sick with the flu as well. That little quote and those little comments there are the only times the flu is mentioned in the whole meeting.
Wow, that's incredible. Because they're living through a moment where this terrible disease has come to our shores on the other side of the world. We're not immune anymore from this because of distance. And everything's being shut down, and they don't mention it more than that.
Yeah. 2.5 months after the first case was in there. So you know it's going crazy at this stage.
Yeah.
2 weeks after the meeting, whereby the league decided they would essentially go ahead with the season as normal, even discussing tours to other countries and having other countries visit Australia. Even though that was being discussed, there were some journals suggesting that interstate football alone may not be permitted to go ahead, let alone the game itself and tours and whatnot.
That sounds very familiar.
Just going, don't worry about it. It's not happening if we don't address it.
Yeah.
So there were I mentioned a few players who had to come back and play out of retirement. These are notable players. There was a lot more than these. But these are the big stars at the time who came out of retirement and come and helped out some of the clubs that were hit by the flu during the 1919 season. Because player numbers just got smashed. So Paddy McHugh, former Test player who'd been retired since 1916, he came out to play for West 3 years later. Arthur Butler and Bob Craig, who were both aged 37, continued on for one last season with Annandale and Balmain respectively. Bob Graves, who retired in 1913, played 7 games for Annandale. Sid Dean came out of retirement to play in a game for Norse. Charlie Russell did the same thing for Newtown, despite having retired 4 years earlier as well. And the list of other regular first graders coming in and playing in for the first time in a year or two, it just goes on and on and on. Despite this, the New South Wales Rugby League season remained at their full 14 rounds as they had for the previous several years. It was still played in front of crowds, with only a very moderate drop in crowd figures. Yet there were still some games played in front of large crowds, such as, when I say large crowds, we're talking about crowd totals bigger than 15,000.
Mm-hmm.
Noting that they only had 56 games in a regular season then.
Yeah.
So South versus West in round 1 drew 20,000. South versus Glebe in round 3 drew 17,000. Balmain versus South in round 4 drew 25,000. Balmain versus East in round 8 drew 17,000, and their return match in round 14 drew another 20,000.
That's a bit surprising.
That's just club games.
Yeah. That's really, really surprising to me because, I mean, Sydney siders were seeing the death and despair that this disease was bringing to Sydney, and they were still turning up to footy games. That's really interesting.
When you consider that 1 in 3 were infected, how many infected people would have been at a game with 25,000 people in attendance?
Yeah, exactly.
Knowing that players were infected.
Yeah. That's shocking.
Yeah. And just didn't care. Just kept playing. Well, I wouldn't say didn't care. They just kept playing they had to, I guess. The New South Wales Rugby League then sent out a request to New Zealand to come and do a tour for the first time since the war had ended. And New Zealand said, yep, no worries. They arrived in Melbourne at the very end of May and start of June and were immediately quarantined in Melbourne. After almost a week there in quarantine, they were released and began their tour in Sydney on June 7. They travelled to Tamworth, Newcastle, Ipswich, Brisbane, Rockhampton and Toowoomba on an 11-game tour. Didn't play any tests.
Wow, that's interesting. So the Rugby League at the time just used those games as a way to make money. Like, it wasn't even about the sporting contest at all. It was just, we need somebody out there generating funds for us.
Exactly.
Wow.
11 days into their tour, 3 of the Kiwi players were bedridden with the flu. Tancred, Summers and Wilson, alongside tour managers Oakley and Levian. This caused the game that was scheduled to be played at Orange on June 19 to be postponed before it was ultimately cancelled. They still continued their tour after that game was cancelled.
Wow.
In June, the North Sydney team also travelled up to Tamworth for a game. Upon returning home, it was found that 6 of their players had come down with the flu as well.
It's kind of shocking, eh?
On June 21, several of the New South Wales Stars who were set to play against the touring Kiwi side were ruled out because they had the Spanish flu. That was Lyle Wall, Ray Norman, Immortal Frank Burge, Reg Latta, Albert Johnson, Dick Townsend, and Kerwick. I've forgotten his first name. So they all got replaced for the third game between New South Wales and New Zealand. It's, a week before that, on June 15, Glebe played Balmain in a game where 9 of their usual 13 first-grade players were all out with the flu, and Balmain had 3 of their regulars out as well.
Man, rugby league is the most stubborn sport in the whole world. That, like, they're just forging ahead. Like, if there's players out, they replace them. That's incredible.
Now, there is the ultimate worst part of the story, and this is, remember, this is all in June.
Yeah.
All of what I've said is all in June. In June of 1919, Mick Frawley, who played for the Roosters in their debut season in 1908, succumbed to the virus and died.
Wow.
So it wasn't just a case of league got lucky. It didn't.
No.
One of their pioneer players passed away from this virus, and if that's not a big enough name for you, because he did actually play for Australia, Daly Messenger and his wife Annie both contracted the disease and fell very frightfully ill. Daly survived, but sadly his wife didn't.
Oh, geez, I didn't know that. Hey,
it's you got some pretty prominent people there. 2 people right there, and they both played for the East Club.
Mm-hmm.
So it can hit the game, and that's at a time when the game only had 8 clubs, and as I said, they played 4 games every week, and they only had 14 rounds, 56 games. Nothing like the near 200 game system they've got now.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, with the games where there was 7 or 9 players that were out of it, like, that's a chunk of the rugby league professional playing population. Like, there's not many professional players at this point. in the first grade competition.
No, that's right. Especially because, we'd had, 5 years of war before that, which depleted the playing stocks immensely.
Mm-hmm.
Especially for the Glebe Club, because they gave so many players to the war effort.
Mm-hmm.
And so for them to have got out of the war and gone, hooray, the war's over, we've got our players back, and then have 9 of their 13 regulars all missing because of the flu, be like, fuck.
Yeah. Absolutely incredible that the game was allowed to continue. Like, you would think that officials at the time would have realised that was a prime mover just for people around the city, and that's incredible. I didn't know any of that.
Yeah. One other part of this story, not directly linked to Rugby League in 1919, but was very important to the game, was James Joynton Smith. If you don't know him, listen to an episode on the chaos of the 1909 season. That episode speaks about how important he was to the game. He eventually paid for the Wallabies to switch codes and come over to Rugby League, and that move actually helped save Rugby League essentially. Mm. After he spent his time in Rugby League, he became the Lord Mayor of Sydney in 1918. James Joynton Smith was very prominent in Sydney hospitals, and the two major ones there was the Royal South Sydney Hospital and the Royal Prince Alfred Hospital. He served as the senior director for both of those from 1911 till 1932. He was also a director of the Wentworth Falls Convalescent Home and the founding president of the Picton Lakes Soldiers and Sailors Settlement at Thirlmere. So he had a very good resume when it came to healthcare and hospitals and the kind. Mm-hmm. So because of that, he was assigned to a small council tasked with fighting the spread of the flu. And that was pretty much how he spent most of the 1919 year, was, I suppose, trying to keep people's spirits up, but trying to give them the right information on how to avoid the illness, how to cope with it when they get it, so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. He was a prominent figure in all of that. So it's interesting that we had a very important rugby league figure from the early days still involved in trying to help all of Sydney, New South Wales cope with this deadly virus sweeping through the area.
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of the movers and shakers in Sydney, like from 1907 onwards, a lot of them are involved in rugby league, and they go back and forth, like into the game and then out of the game, and they're back into the, I guess, the, serving the public in a certain way.
Exactly. So a few months after that, by August, Australia decided to return the favour with New Zealand, who travelled over, and Australia went over to New Zealand and played in 9 games. They won 8 of those, the second test being their only loss. They completely annihilated the opposition while they were over there as well. That tour went without any hitch, and no one fell ill over there. And a month later, most of the virus was pretty much done with in Australia. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of records state that it was pretty much over by mid-September 1919. So, Rugby League's response to the flu back then in 1919 was, Yeah,
they kind of threw caution to the wind, didn't they? And just, no matter who fell ill and stuff, the show went on.
Very much so. And I dare say they used the same mindset that they used for continuing to have competition running during World War One, and that was, we need to have the sport going to keep the people's minds off this catastrophic disease going through the place, or the catastrophic war that was making everyone depressed. Mm-hmm. And that was probably the mindset as to why they continued playing games.
Yeah. And look, when you look at what's happening now at the moment, you can kind of see that to a certain extent, and it's a real balancing act, because you are weighing up the cost to the public's health that there could potentially be, but there really is something to be said about when the footy starts. It's just nice to have something to distract you for a few hours, and I don't know how good the distraction is, but it is a little bit of a distraction, and it is comforting to see something that and you rely on, and you come to get used to still being in place while there's so many other things that are being taken away.
Yeah, I think the difference though, and one criticism you could make about why the game shouldn't go ahead, is in 1919, obviously, all forms of entertainment were places where you had to leave your home and go and take part in. It could have been going to the sport, going to the races, or going to the theatre, or going to listen to music or something like that. You all had to leave your home and actually go somewhere to go and enjoy it. Whereas now, if there's no sport on, you just sit at home and put on Netflix or something like that, or put on a PlayStation or whatever, and just entertain yourself that way.
That's a good point. There are 1,000 things that you can do for entertainment. You're listening to this podcast right now. That's one of the things you can do. And thanks for listening.
Yes.
But that's a really good point. I guess back then in Sydney, I mean, they had shut so many things down, and with the Rugby League still going, but it's crazy to think that there was a priority put on having something going on for entertainment purposes back then. But knowing that it was going to be the perfect place to spread this virus around at the same time, I find it hard to justify then. I think it's easier in some ways to justify it now because you can play in front of an empty stadium and get so many, hundreds of thousands of people can still watch it on TV. I feel like it's easier to justify now than it would have been back then.
No, I agree. And, this is a less deadly, less rapidly spreading virus. And they're taking much greater precaution now than what they did back in 1919.
Yeah.
So that, that works in the favour of the game, obviously. It's... Now, the one thing that you did raise in our off-air podcast...
It was a long one too. We talked for about an hour and a half, 2 hours.
We did. And thankfully you stopped yourself short because it was a very good point. Because you came up to it and you went, we're doing a podcast here.
Okay, yeah.
And we stopped straight away.
Yeah.
We thought we'd talk about whether this unique situation was actually having a negative impact on the game and how it's being played at the moment, because I made the point that most of the football that's been played so far has been pretty bad.
It feels like it, yeah. It feels like, I feel like with all of the footy we've had so far in the first 2 rounds, there's really only been 1 or 2 games that have, I thought the North Queensland versus Broncos game was pretty good. I don't think it was as good as some of them contests have been, but I think you could watch that and be like, man, these teams are ripping in. It's a really enjoyable contest. And look, I think for a lot of the rest of the games, and I haven't seen all the games yet, but I think the rest of the games that I've really watched, they haven't lived up to where you would think they would. And I think that the situation that's going on right now is probably affecting the football. I think there's no doubt that it's affecting the players, and they're only human. Like, they're not robots. But yeah, we're not seeing the best football right now, and I think it's understandable. And I think it's more than just, applying how you feel to what you're seeing. I think it's definitely the game is just, it's missing a little bit of spark at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's the teams that you expect much better from. It's the Melbourne Storm, who have just looked so average. The Sydney Roosters, who look like they don't know how to score points anymore.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but so many of the really good teams who you expect them to come out of the blocks in good form. And usually every year, round 1 or round 2, round 3, you usually get 2 or 3 teams who just absolutely nail it. They may not go on and reach the finals, but they come out of the blocks firing. Like the Dragons and the Warriors are usually always pretty good for a few few good wins at the start of the year.
Mm.
That just hasn't happened this year.
No, and it almost looks like, when you get to about the 3-quarter mark in the season, and there's some teams that their season is effectively over, and you see that hit that it almost is like they've got a mental fatigue as much as anything. It's almost as though there are a lot of teams right now that are playing with the mental fatigue of, 3/4 of a season in. It's really strange. I don't think I've ever seen a start to the season like it, which is obvious in terms of the crowd's not being there, but just the way that the teams are playing. And, we're seeing some really grindy games. We're seeing some mistakes that teams are making that are normally the mistakes you see when somebody is mentally fatigued. And it's only round 2.
Yeah, that's the thing. And I can't put it down to playing in front of empty stadiums and anything like that. I don't think that is having that much of an impact.
No.
I think there is just genuine fear that some of these players may get the virus, and if they do, that could be the end of the game for the year.
Yeah, and I also think that the environment they're finding themselves in now, and like the thing about the empty stadiums, most of the games that they've ever played in their lives were in front of the same crowds, no one there, right? So it's only when they hit the professional level that they're playing in front of crowds. So playing in front of no one again, they've been there, they've done that. It's not something new to them. But I think being in the professional environment and it almost being a sanitized environment at this stage, and they're coming out of their everyday life with their family and stuff like that, where they're trying to be as careful as they can, and they're coming into this sanitized professional environment. I feel like life right now and everything we're seeing in society, it feels so surreal. And I wonder if when they're running out there in front of nobody and the light shows are happening with some clubs and they're playing music and stuff, I wonder if that surreal feeling is having an effect. And we kind of don't know if these games are even going to mean anything. Like if the competition, by the time we put this podcast out, we're going to put this podcast out 10 minutes after we've finished. By the time you're listening to this podcast, the season might have been cancelled. And I'm talking about like midday on Monday, the season might be cancelled. You just don't know if these games are actually going to mean something. And that's got to have an effect in itself. If you're going out there and you have, all these teams that have started 2-0, will it actually count for anything? And the answer to that, nobody can give you right now.
Yeah. This is the thing. We've got so many players in the game who are fathers.
Mm-hmm.
And their big concern, obviously, is going to be, I don't know how safe the players we're playing against are, like how, what their hygiene levels are like.
Yeah.
What if one of them gives me the flu and I take it home to my little baby who isn't old enough to have all the immunisation shots yet? And that's going to be a pretty common issue a lot of players are going to have. There's a lot of young dads out there with very young kids. There was footage of Adam Fanua-Blake doing training with the face mask on.
Mm-hmm.
And some people are saying, "Oh, this is just ridiculous" and stuff like that. And going, "No, he's got 4 kids."
Yeah, I thought it was, if you're a player and you've got access to face masks, I had no problems with that. And I thought it was a little bit gross the way the media covered it as well. They covered it like he was taking the piss or something. And I was like this is a guy that's doing the right thing by his family.
Yeah, like he's trying to, still do his job.
Mm-hmm.
But also he's got to try and make sure he's clean and safe for his family that he's got to go back home to every night.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got the horrible situation that the Warriors are in. They can't even go back and see they can't go back and see their wives or their babies. They've got to sit there and just, ride it out until they can go back home, knowing that they can't come back until this virus has gone away. And to some degree, part of the NRL season kind of relies on them to not go home. That's a horrible situation to be in.
Really, really is. And if they if they return to New Zealand tomorrow, if they're physically able to, because we're starting to see international travel just shut down completely. If they're physically able to get back to New Zealand tomorrow, then they have to be in quarantine for 2 weeks. And, if their family, if they were able to sort out having their immediate family come over and stay with them in Australia, they wouldn't be able to see them for 2 weeks. It really is. I don't think that we're giving enough credit to the Warriors. The fact that they didn't lose on the weekend by 60 points, I think, was extraordinary.
I fully agree. I completely expected those guys to be absolutely flogged by the Raiders because I thought, how can they have their minds 100% on the job with this going on around them? And to their credit, to have only lost by 14, I think was an absolute stellar effort on their behalf. And I love the fact that a lot of fans are going out and buying memberships in the Warriors.
Yeah.
That's a bloody good sign.
It is.
It's one of those great things that happens in rugby league every now and then is you just see one of those little movements go on to help the game out. That was fantastic to see.
Yeah, it was beautiful. And look, I've been very, very against this push by some people within the game saying, oh, the clubs need your money. The clubs need your money. And I'm the first person to say, man, who needs your money right now is you. Like, you need your money right now. But the Warriors, man, anything that fans can afford to give them, I think they deserve. And I hope that the NRL itself, they're going to be behind the Warriors. They're not going to let the Warriors fall over or anything like that because we've talked about the Warriors generate more for the game than the Warriors take in their grant. But I hope that this time next year, the Warriors club looks at the money that they've got available and they're in rude health. I really do because they deserve. I don't think you can praise them enough. What they're doing and the sacrifice they're making is incredible.
I fully agree. And unheard of in the game before, really.
Yeah, and no team has ever been in that position, really, have they? Where, they're a team from a different nation, and this is a team that's now, they're stuck in Australia, and most of the people who are listening to this are from Australia, and we don't think of it as, imagine if your NRL team was basically stranded in New Zealand, and they didn't know how long for, they didn't know what was going to happen, whether the competition was going to be cancelled. And if it's cancelled, they're still going to be two weeks away from being able to come home. If they're physically able to come home, you got to look at it from the Warriors' point of view. It's amazing that they stayed. It really is amazing.
Yeah, I kind of expected the management to come out and say, yeah, we're going to stay. But then a number of players go, I'm not. I'm going home. Yeah. And to their credit, that just hasn't happened. They've stayed as a unit. They've stayed solid. So, yeah, massive raps on for that.
Mm-hmm.
I think what else we could chuck in there, I guess. Because I think one thing that's been interesting on a more amusing level.
Yeah.
We've had 2 games at Leichhardt Oval this week.
Yes.
And there's been if you haven't seen it, there's been a family that owns a house just around the ground there, and they've erected some scaffolding, and they've been standing on top of it with a bunch of mates, I dare say it is, watching the game from over the fence, and they've been making a hell of a lot of noise in their games. It's been absolutely fantastic.
I tell you what though, the last game they played, the Tigers versus Knights game, there were a lot of people around the outside of the stadium, and I think it's, they play at Leichhardt Oval because, and I don't know if that game was scheduled for Leichhardt Oval, the second one, but the Roosters game was moved there. They play at Leichhardt Oval because it's very cheap to play there. You see a lot of New South Wales Cup games played there because it's very cheap. I have a feeling that with the growing crowds outside of the stadium, and it is wonderful to see, and there's a lot of commitment there. And if you're willing to stick your head over the top of a fence to watch it, that's fantastic. You love the game. There's no doubt about it. They're all fans. But there does come a point where if I'm a rugby league official, I'm thinking not only does it kind of look bad at a certain point when you've got a dozen people sticking their head over the fence from one backyard at a time. But I'm also starting to wonder about the exposure for my players and the broadcasters and the officials at some point.
I don't mind the ones that were in the backyard because they're still in their house property. They're not actually at the venue, but there was talk of people trying to get into the ground.
Oh, really?
And that's the one I don't like.
Yeah, that's a problem. See, I saw there were some backyards where they were packed with people. They were like, if it was a family, say you have a house that backs onto it, and there's 3, 4, 5 of you that stick your head over the fence. I've got no problems with that, right? But I was seeing like pretty decent groups of people sticking their head over the fence.
10 plus.
Yeah, and that's people that are traveling there to do that, and that's the problem. And I have a feeling that we might see the NRL move to more enclosed stadiums. I don't know which ones they'll pick because it will come down to a cost issue. They're going for the cheapest stadiums possible, but I think the NRL will be trying to avoid that going forward.
I think in the end, if they want to try and keep costs down, knowing that they're going to be playing in front of crowds of 0, then they should just start having double and triple headers at one venue like the Bankwest Stadium and the like.
Well, look, that's one thing I was thinking of, but then you're exposing a lot of people once again to the possibility of, like, if you have a triple header and you find out one player on the field comes down with the virus, you basically have to quarantine all of those teams. So I feel like it's a risk.
That's true. Yeah.
You know, and it's weird because it's, you know, they're risking things anyway playing games. But I think you try and cut down those risks anytime you can. I mean, I was even thinking, like, they've played 2 games in 2 days at Leichhardt Oval. That in itself has to be some sort of risk, surely.
Well, they did the same thing at Seabus as well on the Gold Coast. Had 2 games in 2 days there as well. I'd like to know how you clean a football ground because it's not the seats. No one's sitting in those.
No.
How do you clean the actual grass so this doesn't have any virus in it?
Yeah, do you need to?
It's weird things like that, yeah.
You know, would the virus survive overnight on grass? I don't know.
What's the thing? How often do you see players spitting on the ground?
Yeah.
And there's going to be a lot of that getting around there. It takes one of those players to be, you know, let's say, for argument's sake, Bryce Cartwright spits on the ground. Are you going to want to be tackled on that same bit of grass?
Let's see what you did there.
I was just picking a random name.
I don't think he'd be able to take out a player even like that, quite honestly. Yeah, it's a really good question. I feel as though they were probably disinfecting the change rooms. You would think they would be.
Yeah, they would be. And all the equipment and stuff like that would all get disinfected.
Yeah.
The grass is the only thing that you don't know about.
Yeah.
And look, we're not doctors, so we don't know if that's. I mean, it's the only profession I don't have. But it's the only thing we don't know about, like, you know, whether a virus can survive and how long it can while it's not inside a host, so to speak.
Yeah, and like, I mean, they still don't know a huge amount about this virus. They're getting new information about it every day, but, you know, I've seen just in the last few days on the news where they've said they think the first symptoms might actually be that you get an upset stomach from it. And they're looking into that, like that they don't know everything about this virus, which is incredible. So yeah, playing at the one venue on back-to-back days, I mean, I guess that is a certain amount of risk as well. And I guess that then transitions into we're now and we're recording on a Sunday night, basically very late Sunday night. And at the moment, we've got a bunch of states that have shut their borders. New South Wales and Queensland and the ACT are the only ones that haven't officially done that yet. And that brings into question how we go forward with the competition at this point and where we might be in like a week from now. Because a week ago, if you'd said all of these restrictions are in place, it would have sounded like it was impossible. But here
Well,
we are.
probably even a little excessive. But this is the thing is, the Melbourne Storm, in their effort to try and make sure that they reduce the amount of exposure they may have had to the virus in Sydney, because actually that's where it's pretty much at its worst in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
They flew into Sydney on a private plane, literally just two hours or so before kickoff.
Mm-hmm.
They did their training on the actual venue, played the game. After the game, they did what they usually do with the physio and whatnot in the dressing sheds, and they hopped on the charter plane, went back to Victoria, and they're down back in Melbourne now. And they could arrive back here at midnight after the game.
Mm-hmm.
That means that they're now back here in Melbourne. This week, they've got to host Penrith down here. And I believe if it hasn't happened already, it's probably bound to over the next few days. The border between New South Wales and Victoria is going to be closed. Mm. Melbourne's already here, so that would mean that they can't go to New South Wales. Penrith can't get in. What do they do about that game? Do they just postpone it? And I suppose there's a whole heap of other issues like, Manly's obviously got to play the Warriors. They're still in New South Wales, so they can do that. The Cowboys have got Parramatta. They're hosting Parramatta up there in Townsville.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty much the only other tour that has to take place. The rest of the games are in and around Sydney.
Yeah, no. I mean, the Prime Minister made an address on Sunday night, and he said all non-essential travel to basically cancel it. But he also said that if you need to travel for work, that's kind of essential travel.
Yeah.
And these footy players, they're professional players. This is their work. It's a really tough position for the game to be in. And I know that the NRL has talked about what they've got a lot of contingency plans. They had a contingency plan in place for if the Warriors went home. They haven't had to enact that yet. They've said that they are able to continue the competition if the Warriors are not involved. My guess is they are able to continue some level of the competition if other clubs pull out as well.
Well, the only other one really I think that may have to pull out is probably the Storm, given that the New South Wales-Queensland border is still open.
Yeah, but you wonder for how long, you know.
Yeah.
And the thing about the Storm is they're a privately owned club, it allows them a certain level of control over themselves that they can make. I mean, because they're privately owned, they can make some really immediate decisions instead of having to go through a board process and things like that, you know.
I was going to say, the one thing Melbourne have that may go against them is the fact that their next three games are all down here in Melbourne.
Okay.
And it's against Penrith, then South, then the Titans.
See, I wonder if the Melbourne Storm will look to relocate to the easiest place for them to relocate would be Sydney, because no matter what happens, they're going to be playing a lot of the clubs in Sydney. Most of the clubs are still based in, or half the clubs based in Sydney or thereabouts. So the smart thing would be for them to come to Sydney. But then, I mean, Cameron Smith has already said we should cancel the season. Is he gonna be a player? Because if Cameron Smith said, "Look, I'm not doing that," I think it starts a cascade of things.
I'll tell you what, looking at their draw,
mm-hmm.
I would say the smartest thing for Melbourne to do would be to base themselves either in Brisbane
mm-hmm.
or the Gold Coast, because aside from Penrith and South over the next 2 weeks, after that they play the Titans, it's Titans at Melbourne, the Cowboys at Townsville, then the Warriors at down here in Melbourne. The Warriors are based on the Gold Coast at the moment,
mm-hmm.
and then they've got the Dragons on, Magic Weekend at Suncorp.
Okay.
So most of their games would be based in Queensland then anyway.
Yeah, no, look, I think at this point, I wouldn't be shocked if games completely moved to where they were supposed to be played as well. Like, if it's, say, for instance, if you've got to play the Cowboys, I wouldn't be shocked if, Townsville's a bit different because, like I've read, I don't know if it's true, that they haven't had any cases up there in North Queensland. That might have changed since I last heard that. But yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if games moved around. We saw games played at really weird stadiums as well.
Yeah, I mean, there was talk actually that the virus doesn't function as effectively in warmer climates, but I looked on the WHO website and they seem to think that, well, they claim on there that that's not exactly true.
Yeah, I feel like that's one of those wives' tales as well. I'm guessing that you're probably better off being in a warm environment as opposed to the cold sort of environment where you're going to get that sort of flu-like environment anyway. But I would be shocked if it was something that couldn't be transferred still in warm weather. But I'm not a doctor. I mean, what the fuck do I know?
That's right.
But what you didn't have to, agree with me so quickly. Jeez.
I don't want to agree. I don't agree with you all the time.
Yeah.
People think it's a bit of a wank fest.
Oh, jeez. But yeah.
Mind you, I was saying that's right about you not being a doctor. You slipped that other line in afterwards.
Yeah, what the fuck do I know? Yeah.
And I'm too slow a thinker to be able to change what I was going to say. It just came out, and I thought, oh, whoops.
Yeah,
anyway.
It's all right. Look, I think if the thing I kind of am looking at, and everything's moving so quick, if Queensland shuts its borders, and Victoria's about to shut the border to New South Wales. The ACT has said we basically don't have the ability to shut the border. It's just not feasible. I wonder if the NRL is set up for a contingency plan where we basically revert back to having either a Sydney competition or just a New South Wales based competition with, say, the Knights and the Canberra Raiders involved in it, which would be really, really a lot easier to deal with than having to have teams flying around, because if it's just a New South Wales or a Sydney-based competition, you can now use buses to get around. And once you're using buses, you can control how much exposure players are having to a really, really high degree.
I think they would probably be more inclined to want to make sure that if they're confined to having one state available,
mm-hmm.
then they just get all 16 teams to come to that state.
Yeah, and look, and the Warriors won't care where they are. They're away from home.
You only need 8 venues. If you want to give every team a different venue, you only need 8 venues.
Yeah.
Each week. But as we've seen this week, you can double up a few.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be more inclined, if they need to double up, I wouldn't do it one day after the other. So I'd have a Friday game at one venue and then have a Sunday game at that venue and just have that Saturday to properly, thoroughly go through the venue, head to toe and clean it.
Yeah.
That'd be the way to do it.
And I tell you something else. I wouldn't be shocked if they get to that point, if they look at the draw and they say something. So say for instance that 6 p.m. Friday night game, which is, I don't think it's ideal for anything, for TV or anything. I wouldn't be shocked if they said, look, we can afford to move that game to 8 p.m. on a Sunday night, and move games around a little bit, because it's not like they're putting fans or corporate sponsors or anything out. They're literally they can shuffle games if they need to. So I wouldn't be shocked if we saw that.
They could go one game every day of the week.
They could, if they could make sure there was enough of a break between games. I mean, I think they'd like to have at least 6. I think they moved up to 6 days break they like to have between games for teams. I don't know if they would be willing to change that to 5 days, because if they change it to 5 days, maybe you could almost get games on every single day of the week. I mean, it'd have to go close.
But given that there'd be such a reduced amount of travelling involved, we could probably get away with that. Yeah,
and I tell you something else, you might be able to, and I've talked about in the future when we get enough teams, that instead of having this weekend we have round 1, next weekend we have round 2, you might be able to stagger the way that the draw is, so that in the space of a month you might be able to get 5 rounds of football in there.
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
I think that the more games we can play, the better at this stage. Because do you feel like we're going to get a full season in?
Um, I'm under the impression that the league is committed to trying to get the full season in,
Mm-hmm.
and the only thing that's going to stop them is if the Prime Minister comes out and says you can't.
Yeah.
I think they're so determined to make this work.
See,
Um,
I feel as though we're going to probably get, and this is just a guess, right? But I feel as though we're going to get, hopefully, this next round in, hopefully a couple more rounds after that. But I feel as though then we're going to have the season suspended for maybe a couple of months, and then start up again after that. And I don't think we're going to play the full set of games. I've always kind of felt like if they could get it so every team has played everyone once, they'd be happy with that, and then go into a final series.
yeah, they'd also have to do away with the bye rounds around Origin because they wouldn't need them obviously if they're knocking 10 weeks off the usual competition.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Because that's the thing is they're still going to want their content. The big issue now is also going to be, do they go ahead with the tour at the end of the year?
I can't believe that hasn't been cancelled already, to be honest. I heard some reports in the media, I think it was before the weekend started, that they were going to make an announcement in the next 48 hours on that, and of course that didn't happen. The thing I think with the tour is that new NRL club or player contracts kick in on November 1st. That's when the contract basically flips over to the next season's contract. So my feeling is that they're probably going to have everything sorted by November 1st. Now, they might be able to sit down with the Players Association and push that back a little bit, but they're not going to be able to push it back too much. Like, they might get to December 1st or something like that. And then you're running into the heat. You can't be playing in an Australian summer. It's just way too hot. No matter if you cut the game into quarters and you had drinks breaks, it's just going to get too hot at some point. So I think that scrapping the tour is just an easy way to find a good month where you could maybe get a final series in.
I think they're going to have to scrap it given that the coronavirus is a lot more deadlier in the UK at the moment than it has been in Australia. I mean, they've had 233 deaths over there.
Yeah.
Over 5,000 confirmed cases. 1,000 of those have been in the last week.
Yeah, it's very scary how it's hitting. I mean, Europe's the epicenter now. They've had more cases in Europe than they had in China.
Yeah. And that's because there's such massive populations in such tiny areas.
Yeah, and in a lot of places, some of the places it's like still ancient, like roads and small roads, and they're using plumbing that was put in by Romans. It's the things that make parts of Europe beautiful, unfortunately, are also the things that allow it to be so susceptible to a pandemic. It's very, very sad and scary what's happening over in Europe, and I just can't see that any Australian Rugby League player is going to be ready to go over and play in Europe for any reason, by the time the Kangaroo Tour is supposed to be kicked off.
Yeah. Just about every single local authority in the UK has got at least one case of coronavirus right now.
Yeah.
But it's mostly, looks to be in the south and around London where obviously it's going to be hardest hit. The north doesn't seem to have been too hard hit at the moment. But it is only March.
Yeah. And look, they're already talking about the NHS over there is starting to get towards a point where it's a real problem. They're not going to be able to handle everything. In Italy, they've been, deciding who they give, treatment to. They've been
It's
absolutely,
dire there in Italy. I mean, they're sitting there saying, "All right, who do we just let die and who do we try and save?"
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
that's a horrible situation to be in. Um, Another horrible situation is the media reporting on this. Um, if I'm going to say anything here, and people go to official sources. Don't go to the media for your information. Go to government sources for information about what's been shut down and what hasn't, what to do, what not to do. Go to the World Health Organization website. Get information there. Don't buy into whatever you find on Facebook or Twitter or whatever the bloody media tells you, because a lot of that is not accurate. Just go to the official sources.
yeah. And look, there's the press conferences have been fantastic by the New South Wales, and I'm looking at it from New South Wales point of view. I'm sure you're getting the same thing down in Victoria. The state governments are doing a lot of press conferences. As far as the Commonwealth goes, the press conferences by Scott Morrison have been fantastic. And yeah, please just go by the official source, because I've seen some really terrible reporting, especially when you go onto social media and on Twitter and things like that. It's been really, really bad. There's a lot of like fake stuff that's been passed around as fact, especially on Facebook apparently.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's some really, really terrible stuff, really nasty stuff too. So yeah, just go by, don't go by what some celebrity on TV or something says. It's some of the people that are giving out advice. It's like, why are you giving out advice? You sing songs.
Or you played a TV doctor, not a real one.
Yeah, exactly. Just go to the officials. They're the ones giving out the best advice, and do what they say.
Exactly. And calm down. Seriously, the worst thing you need right now is panic. There has been stories, sadly, of people who don't need Ventolin and stuff like that going to chemists and buying it, and it's a lot of people who are actually asthmatic are finding it hard to actually get some.
Mm-hmm.
That's something I've noticed firsthand myself. So don't get what you don't need. Whenever you're going to buy something, just say, "Do I need this, or does someone need it more than me?"
Yeah.
Get what you need. If you're going to get quarantined, it's only for 2 weeks. It's not for 4 months. Use some common sense. You're not going to need 250 rolls of toilet paper if there's only you and 3 other people in your house. Just use some common sense, people. That's all I ask.
Yeah, and I mean the only thing I would say, and I just bag people that gave advice, so I'm going to give you some. Like, if you don't have to go out, don't go out.
Yeah,
that's the only thing I would say. And that's what I'm doing. I'm in a position to, luckily. But if you don't have to go somewhere, if it's if you're going out for something that's a luxury, it's something that you don't really need to get by, just don't go out.
Exactly. Stay at home and try and do whatever you can to keep yourself. And don't worry about contracting coronavirus. Do what you can to make sure you just don't get the flu. Just be smart about it.
Yeah. It's a very strange time. It's something that, and you and me were talking before the podcast. It was a fantastic podcast once again that we did record.
Magnificent.
Really good.
Probably one of the best ever podcasts ever recorded.
Yeah, ever not recorded. We talked about the things that have been the biggest events in our lifetime, and the Berlin Wall being one of them, 9/11 obviously being one of them. It's crazy to think that in our lifetime, this is the big event that probably will overshadow both of those things, and that will be looked at in 100 years and understood that it was how devastating it is. And we're lucky that this coronavirus isn't like the plague or something that killed so many more people that got it.
Or the Spanish flu. It's crazy too to think that this coronavirus flu has pretty much been on our shores for a month? A bit over a month?
Yeah.
And people have already forgotten about the bushfires that devastated this country for 3 or 4 months before that. That's how worldwide global and how big this thing is.
Yeah, and the drought, you know,
Mm.
it's weird how certain things, the volume is turned up way louder than other events. It's very strange to be living through something that it kind of reminds me of, remember when you used to read about tsunamis and you couldn't picture it, and then when the tsunamis hit Japan in particular and you were watching it on TV and you were like, oh, this is what that is when you see it. And it's kind of a similar thing in this instance, in that you only ever read about what a pandemic was and things going into lockdown and all that sort of thing, and you only ever read about it, and now we're living through it, and it's like, oh, this is it. Like, this isn't a drill. This is the real thing, you know, and it's a very strange moment to live through.
That's right. And I just want to stress that humans have lived through much worse viruses than this, much more deadly, much more, aggressively spreading ones. And the race survived. It's just common sense and being sensible is one of the biggest things that I can stress, that we need to help get through this. If we go out and start being all selfish and inconsiderate of everybody else, then we're going to start leaving some people who are unable to properly care for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And they could be the people that are vulnerable, and they could be the ones who die, and that could be a problem.
Yeah.
And we've got to try and do what we can to look after one another so that we don't end up having any deaths because of this. That's the main goal here. And so that's why I'm a bit more passionately opposed to people hoarding stuff. I'm not going to go on a rant about that. I've already had that bit. So it's just look after one. Think about people around you instead of just yourself as much. That's pretty much what I'm getting at.
Yeah, and when and I think they're going to start bringing in firmer measures in terms of, staying at home and what businesses are open and closed and that. And when that starts happening, the thing I would say is, like, if it seems like an extreme measure, it is, because it's an extreme moment in our modern history, and treated as such. It's not a joke. And I don't want to be one of these fucking celebrities. Did you see those fucking pricks singing that song by John Lennon? Like, can we feed those people through a fucking garden shredder? Because seriously, what the fuck
I
are they?
see it.
Oh my god!
Fill me in.
All of this, and it must have been coordinated. I don't know if they had the same managers or something, but they all started singing "Imagine" by John Lennon, and they're like singing "Imagine if there's no possessions," as they're all in their fucking mansions. Like, fuck off.
Oh my goodness.
Couldn't believe it.
The only music videos I've seen about this whole coronavirus have been people doing a piss take of, I was only 19, and they've called it COVID-19.
No, I haven't seen that one.
And they've been singing about, pretty much the inability to buy toilet paper.
That's hilarious. Yeah. Hey, how about that the podcaster song that I wrote earlier today?
Now, you know what? That was the very last thing that I've got here.
I'm not going to sing it.
No, you don't have to sing it. I think if you read it out, it'll sound like poetry. It'll be just as beautiful.
Okay, I'll have to find it. Let me try and find it.
That way, we can both claim to be poets, because you wrote out some of my poetry last year on an episode.
Well, so you should read this out then.
No, you've got the voice for reading out poetry.
I do?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm telling you do, so I don't have to read it out.
You fuck. Okay, so for anybody that's a fan of great singer Kenny Rogers, he's dead, and he died of natural causes on the weekend. He had a good life though.
So that escalated quickly.
Yeah, well, look, I feel like Kenny Rogers lived a bloody good life. He was kind of like Burt Reynolds, He didn't die wondering. Anyway, he had a song called The Gambler. We all know The Gambler. We've all
Yeah.
sung it when we've been drunk or whatever. And yeah, so I made one called The Podcasters, and it's about you and me, Andrew. I think you should do it because I did your poem. Your poem went for like 17 fucking pages.
Yeah, but you know what? I did a whole heap of research for a history thing today, so you should do this bit.
Fucking prick. Okay. Okay, so this is called The Podcasters. On a warm autumn evening, after tweeting about nothing, I met up with a historian. We were both too tired to sleep. So we took turns at staring at our feeds in the darkness. The boredom overtook us and I began to speak. I said, mate, I've made a life out of making people angry. Writing about football, big hits, great runs and tries. So if you don't mind me saying, I can see you want a podcast. I have an idea. I'll give you some advice. So we jumped on Skype and talked. Looked up stats and stalked. He was eating tin tuna. I had myself a Coke. As the night got deathly quiet, we kept on talking footy. I said, if you're going to do a podcast, you've got to do this fucker right. You've got to know when to praise them, know when to bag them, know when to make a joke, and know you're a cunt. You never say that you're wrong. You just rewrite a song. Tell them that you're glorious and podcast the lot. Now, every expert knows the secret to surviving is knowing that you're always right and knowing Crawley's a sheep. Because Cameron Smith's a winner and Elliott's a loser. And the best you can hope for is to laugh at the Poms. And when I finished speaking, Andrew turned towards the window, crushed another apple, and agreed we should record. And somewhere in the darkness, the historian got serious, but his final words were positive. And I found a podcast host. You've got to know the game's history. It can't be a mystery. Know the great players and know all the clubs. You never forget a stat. You've got to be too good to forget that. There'll be time to stop counting when the project's done. So that was
lovely.
it. The
That's
podcast.
lovely.
Yeah. And you know the weird thing was, I woke up, basically sat up in bed like the Undertaker waking up from a knockout in the WWE and just started bashing away on that on my phone. So that was kind of weird.
That's fantastic, mate. That was brilliant.
Thank you.
I mean, you knew it was brilliant, but yeah, I just want to tell you, people, go find that on Twitter and retweet it. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it was good fun. I had a good laugh writing all that stuff. Like, and I knew there was little things in it that, like, you would find funny, like you smashed an apple.
The can of tuna one, man, I was smashing them hard too when we first started chatting.
Yeah, you were.
Sat in here making tuna sandwiches, and then I just got bored making sandwiches, just ate it out of the tin.
Went all savage on it. Yeah, there's funny little things like that I threw in there that some of our listeners might not get, but I knew you and me would. And it's about our entertainment, really, at the end of the day.
That's right. That's what we did this for. Let me throw in that question. Have we had any emails?
Oh, man. God damn it. Why do I have to do any sort of preparation at all? Like, you're the prep person, damn it.
Yeah, I did my bit. I did the bit at the start. It's your job now.
Yeah, it was very, very impressive. I was very impressed. I think we've got one.
Oh.
Okay, so this is from Greg. Greg Stock from Twitter. You know Greg Stock from Twitter.
Yeah. I think he's a fan of mine.
Yeah. He gives me this shit all the time, doesn't he?
Yeah, okay. He's a good bloke. I like Greg.
He said, he said, hope you know my gentle jibing on Twitter is all very good nature. Great admirer of your podcast. Love it. Please keep up the good work. Best wishes, Greg Stock. So that's very nice, Greg. That's very nice of you.
Good on you, Greg.
Yeah, that's very nice. Is
he the guy who constantly asks if he can subscribe to me but not you?
I think it is, hey. I'm pretty sure it is. Go fuck yourself, Greg. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I take all of this stuff. I hope people know from listening to me on the podcast now that, I'm not the same sort of fucking cunt that comes across on Twitter. I'm only like 85% of that.
Yeah,
so
you're not the abrasive part of it.
No. I say most things like with a bit of a smile on my face. Doesn't mean I don't mean it, but at least I smile when I say it.
A bit of shit stirring.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the only one we've got. I don't think I've missed another one. Yeah, I haven't missed another one. So yeah, it was just Greg.
That's a good email. Well, thanks for that. People, if you want to tune into us, I mean, you can find us on YouTube, and it's a good idea to go over there and subscribe to us over there, because as the season goes on, we will be doing live broadcasts occasionally. Typically, without even trying, we tend to do a live broadcast on the shittiest games of the week.
Don't we kill a game? Jeez.
We just do. So tune in to us whenever there's a game on. If you hear that we're going to be doing a live broadcast, and we'll let you know. Tune in, because you know the game will be an absolute dog. So we'll entertain you instead, because that's just what happens. Unless it's an international, because if it's Italy versus Spain again, mate, that shit's gone on for 3 hours. That was brilliant. That's probably my favourite one to do last year, hey? That was fantastic. History. That was a history-making game. We were up till bloody 3 a.m. with that one. That was fantastic. Yeah. So yeah, get over there, subscribe to us on that. You ought to check out all of our live shows as they happen. We're on all those podcasting things where you listen to us. We don't need to tell you which ones they are, because you've already found it out. Yeah. Tell your friends about us. Like, go to your friends. Yeah. Go up to them, right? Get real close to them too, to like talk really close into them, and say, "Listen, I will only leave once you've subscribed to this cool podcast I've heard. It's called Fergo and the Freak," and make them get their phone out and subscribe to us. Yeah, and then wipe your spittle off their face. Yeah. You check us out on Instagram and on Twitter at Fergo Freak Pod. Have we added anything on Instagram recently? No, I just put all the pictures up there when we created the account, and I just left it. Okay, that's fair enough. There's some good pictures on there, though. Lots of podcast memories. So what I should do, if I was doing this properly, is I'll be putting up a picture and a bit of promo for every episode that's been released. That sounds like work, though, eh? It does. That's a problem. Yeah. Well, you know what I might do? I might send you a picture of my new microphone, hey? That sounds good. We can put that up. Yeah. We'll do that tomorrow. Sounds like a plan. Yeah. We're even going to have content on the Instagram page, people. How's that? Podcast with content on Instagram. Have we worked out who the fuck is running the Twitter? Nah. That was saying some cheeky shit too during the week. Yeah, I was waking up and reading some of the shit. And I'm like, who the fuck is running this shit? Because it's not me. There was some good gear on there. I tell you what, it's fucking controversial. What was this one here? In this episode, League Freaks sound like a robot. We promised to have that fixed in the next episode. We can't have any evidence out there that he is a robot, because that would be fantastic. Wouldn't it be? Like if it turned out that I really was a robot. Yeah. I mean, that voice chip is fantastic. Yeah. Yeah, the last episode, I know you didn't hear it so much, but I chucked in my good headphones to listen to it, and I feel like there was a little bit of a slight reverberation or something. So I apologise for that. It's just this new microphone. We'll get it sorted out. I'm hoping that I've sorted out the problem for this podcast. I'm sure I have. But how about the fucking cheeky fucker that runs the Twitter feed though? Like, we'll fix it out. Who the fuck is we? Where's the other person? Exactly. We haven't got a producer. No. I'll tell you what, they made a pretty nasty one about this Clarkey guy. Oh, jeez. Go find that one, people. I'm not reading that out on here. That's libellous, that one is. I'm not going to read that one. I saw that one too, yeah. I was like, fuck, man. Who the fuck is running this shit that loves drama? I'll run from that shit. What was this other one? Joel Gould from the NRL said, "It's a Broncos miracle as Matt Lodge throws away his knee brace. He's set to return to running." And whoever was running our account said, did he throw it at a family?
Jesus. When I saw that, I was like, oh, jeez.
That was a bit touchy.
Yeah.
Rule number 1 for working from home: watch the porn and masturbate first thing.
I saw that one. I actually agreed with that one.
Well, that is good advice.
Yeah. Yeah. As soon as you get like, peace and quiet, you knock one out like a soldier.
Otherwise, you're just going to be distracted by that shit all day because you know you're going to do it at some point.
Yeah, you don't want to be backed up while you're working from home.
And thinking about it at the same time, you just go out there, you know what, get that shit out of the road, then concentrate on work.
Yeah, exactly.
Then do it again after lunch.
Well, yeah.
I
mean, what are we, animals? We're supposed to wait until, like, dinner?
Yeah. I don't know how the people work around that. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, get on there. If you think you can do a better job than whoever it is running that, then we will just go there and change the password and give someone else access to it. What do you reckon?
That'd be a good idea. Maybe we could have a contest where we take applications and get people to write applications for taking over the Twitter feed.
There's an idea.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking not just the Twitter feed. We need to get someone on hand just to do our socials.
Just all of them.
Yeah, just do the whole lot.
Yeah, that would be cool. We got to have some rules though. Like it has to be. There cannot be any file attachments. It has to all be done via writing. Because if someone sends me
it's got to be.
You know what I mean?
It's got to be text. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
And realise too that we've got a lot of socials. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
What else is there? If there's a social media platform out there that we're not on, we need to get on it. Because if someone's going to get on and do TikTok, if we're going to get someone on to do our social media stuff, knowing full well that you will not get paid, we need to work these bastards to the bone.
Yeah, you'll basically be like an intern, but we refuse to allow you to put it on your resume.
Yeah. Or leave.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you're in for life.
Yeah. Just interesting, just looking on Twitter there. Politics trending. Andrew.
Oh, really?
I don't know. I don't know what I did, but please let me know if I should apologise or not. I don't feel I should. But there you go. I'm trending.
Yeah. Fuck him. Don't apologise, Andrew. Tell him to go get stuffed. That's what you do.
Politics trending, Andrew. I don't know what that is. Jerry Harvey's also trending. As is ScoMo and Shut Australia Down. Yeah, maybe I'm involved in all that.
Let me tell you about... There's this thing, all right?
Yeah.
You mentioned Jerry Harvey. There is an electronics corporation out there. And every single day this week they've said, you know what? Sales are up $500 on bread makers at our shop. And the media goes out front of their shop and just plays the game. I'm so shocked that they play these games so easily. And it's been a different appliance every day. It's been incredible. It started off deep freezers, and then it was fridges, and then it was bread makers, and like, what the fuck is it going to be this time next week? It's going to be toasters. Toasters, exercise bikes. Man, I really don't like the media.
I'll tell you what, the one thing I saw from the media this week on Twitter, and it was today, was Michael Rowland, who's the ABC Breakfast, I think, male presenter there.
Yeah.
And he went to a commercial shop in Sydney somewhere and took a photo of commercial-sized toilet rolls. You know those massive fucking things?
Yeah.
They don't fit on a domestic one in a house. They're those massive ones. They're 300 metres long.
Yeah.
He says, oh, look how much they're charging for these, like $60 for a pack of 8. And you go, yeah, when you see it's 300 metres per roll, you go, that's actually round about what they are worth.
Yeah,
but he was trying to make it out like they were price gouging. They're trying to make even money out of these toilet rolls. Going, no, that's like 2.4 kilometres worth of toilet paper, mate. $60 is about spot on.
Yeah, I saw somebody did the math, and they were like, it's a little bit more expensive, but it's in the ballpark. It's not in the price gouging range. The other thing that got me while we're talking about this sort of thing, the hordes of people that were jumping onto buses and going to regional centres, and I'm like, is there any evidence of this anywhere? And I got sent a couple of pictures, and one was of an empty bus, and one was of looking into a similar sort of bus, and the people were sort of covering their face. And I'm like, hang on a second. Supposedly this is a minibus full of people that went and filled and just cleaned out a whole shopping centre, and no one's got a picture of it, like anyone pushing a trolley to the bus, of this bus full of all of these products. It just made no sense. And then I saw a journalist had actually rang up a couple of places that they said that were involved, and it turned out that it hadn't happened.
Yeah. Imagine our surprise.
Yeah, just fake news. And then there was that post that had been shared around Facebook. Somebody had made a fake Facebook account and put a lady's face on there and said that she was looking to recruit people to do that sort of thing. And it turned out it was completely fake, but that had been spread around as well. That's what we're saying. Don't fall for any of this stuff. It's all garbage. It's like there was a story on Sydney radio a couple of weeks ago that they were saying someone was stabbed over toilet paper, and it turned out it was complete bullshit.
Tell you what, though, if someone's recruiting someone to do that sort of stuff, I would so jump on board with it and just go, yeah, you know what, I'll do it, and then go along there and just lock the bus. As soon as everyone got off, they went to the shop, they bought all the stuff, and then just locked the bus. And then I'd pull the battery out of it, and then I'd walk off.
What about, right, somebody says, hey, $1,000, 1 day's work, we're going to hit 3 different towns. Are you in? And you go, yeah. And you get on the bus, and I say, right, next stop, Tamworth.
And then you bring Tamworth ahead and say, I'm coming up with a bus full of the best gear you're ever going to get.
We know what I would do.
Tell them what depot you're going to, and just see all of Tamworth there in the car park waiting. They're in here, guys.
All the teenagers hanging out in the car park smoking probably cigarettes, and you see that?
Well censored.
Yeah, smoking cigarettes and just hanging out because there's nothing to do, because Tamworth is already shut at about 6 p.m. But you know what I would do if I was on that bus? I would ring up the highway patrol and I'd say, you know what, there's a minibus full of people going up the M1 and you got to stop it because it's a bunch of drug mules. Just stop it before it gets anywhere close to Tamworth, please, and just take them away, because I would not want to be going to Tamworth.
These are ideas, people.
Yeah.
We've been bloody informative today.
We have. We've been good, Andrew. Episode 145, and we're still hitting home runs.
Look at that.
Yeah.
We're going to ask people again. We asked you what we should do for episode 100, and we barely got a response. So we're going to ask again. You've got another chance here. What should we do for episode 150?
Yeah.
Also, what should we do on our 1 year anniversary episode? Because that is coming up in 5-6 days' time.
Oh, really? Wow, that's so cool.
What should we do? 2 big events, people. What are we going to do?
Yeah.
Hit us up via the email. They can email us at
podcast@leaguefreak.com.
Beautiful. Or you can send us a tweet at FergoFreakPod. Hit us up on there. Let us know what you think we should do. Obviously, genuine good suggestions.
Yeah.
Don't be dickheads about it.
Yeah, we're not going to do some weird shit.
Nah, we're not going to go to effort.
No, it's got to be something we can do sitting in a chair.
Yeah. With our pants on.
Yeah.
Let's make that clear.
You know what? I just heard bloody Julie and Katie just go, Yeah.
You guys are no fun anymore. All right, let's wrap this one up. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. And we will catch you in episode 146.